Hello and welcome. I am Anna and this is a new episode of Project Co, the podcast channel of Efecto Colibrí. A channel inspired by words that start with co, community, consciousness, co-creation, co-evolution, and of course, colibrí, which in Spanish means hummingbird. We have honest conversations with changemakers to explore mindsets and initiatives for positive change. The stories we tell and the stories we listen to have the power to regenerate our perception of ourselves and others. Stories regenerate. This is why at Efecto Colibrí we produce and distribute podcast content to inspire you to create a more human reality in harmony with planet Earth. Discover more at www.efectocolibri.com. Welcome to this episode of Project Co, where we delve into the concept of systemic change. What does it mean? What skills do individuals need to foster it? And how can capital be leveraged to create systemic impact? Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Alejandro Álvarez von Gustedt, Vice President for Europe at Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors. In this role, Alejandro works to accelerate philanthropy in pursuit of a just world by assisting European philanthropists, foundations, and corporations through a combination of advisory, project hosting, and research. After a career in strategy consulting with Monitor Group and serving as the director for the Inter-American Development Bank in Europe, Alejandro focused on building regional networks for social investors. He is a co-founder and board member of Latimpacto, a Latin American network of philanthropists and social investors, and has supported the establishment of the African Venture Philanthropy Alliance and the Asian Venture Philanthropy Network's representative office in mainland China. Join us as we explore the intricacies of systemic change and the role of capital in driving meaningful, lasting impact. Alejandro, welcome to Proyecto Co. It is a great pleasure to have you on board.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
I have been wondering about the question of systemic change. It's a term that many people have in mind and are playing with and are communicating with. And I was thinking, what does it mean to you?
Yeah, and it's a good question because it's a lot of people talk about it and it means different things to different people. And many people don't know what it means. So that it's and we see that a lot in the philanthropy sector. No? To me, I mean, first, what are systems? No, and I go back to very standard definition that's out there. No, it's a set of things, people, cells, institutions that are interconnected, and they produce patterns of behavior. Things happen, right? So, there's lots of systems. Your family is a system, the economy is a system, the climate's system, and so forth. No. So why talk about system change? No, and I think there's a realization that the systems that are in place, and there's many different systems. You can map and define systems a different way, but somehow we're not achieving the results that we desire, or the other way around. I mean, there's lots of results that are very damaging. You can think about the externalities not being captured, the way business is done, and that destroying the planet, or lots of people, the systems create growth in our economies and so forth. A lot of people get left behind, and that's very sticky. It's not easy to undo because somehow these patterns are replicating, no? And that's why system change is all about saying, okay, what are the root causes of all these dynamics, of these patterns? And are there things that we not only need but can change so that those outcomes don't happen, right? I mean, that's my probably unscientific way of describing it, but that's why we care about it, right? It's because recurringly and effectively, we are seeing environmental crises and social crises, and business as usual is not working, right? So we need to change something. And this can be at a planetary scale, the planetary boundaries, the climate and acidification and so forth. It can also be at a smaller scale in some societies, where there's exclusions or there's some people who keep on being left behind. So how do you act on that? Or it can be on also more specific issues like, why does children drop out of school? What are incentives are not being aligned? How do you break those vicious circles? No? So that's why it is relevant for us. I mean, for me personally, and for us as an organization.
And has it always been relevant for you as a person?
No. No, in the sense that I didn't think about this before, right? I mean, it's been a discovery and learning and figuring out why don't things work out and so forth. So I'm a permanent student. I'm still a student, but the more I engaged in thinking about social issues and the more engaged in thinking about environmental issues, the more aware I became of the fact that there are these systems and this stickiness that is not working, right? And the more I engage with people thinking about it. So I've learned from others, right? But I did not, I intuitively always cared about these issues, but my entry point wasn't system change at all. It was just saying, how do we, there's problems, we need to fix those. And only later then you realize that in order to fix those, you need to think about some root causes, which are 3 or 4 steps removed from what you're actually seeing.
Yeah, completely. It makes me think of linear thinking and fractal thinking, no? And the tendency that we have, because it is basically what has been taught to us, at least in the Western society, to see something that is not working and fixating on that and trying to find by any means a solution to tackle that problem, instead of, which would be the linear thinking, instead of looking at the context and the relationships between that problem that we're seeing and wanting to solve, and yes, as you said, the root causes and any other influential element that may be around, no, or had been around in the past and also created the situation that we're having now, no. So that's why I'm super interested in the complexity, in of systems and how we can learn to adopt this kind of perspective, looking at many different points of the map instead of only looking at the point or the city to which we want to get. No, could you give us an example, please, of how it was done in practice before and how the approach of system change would change or transform or adapt the approach?
The way traditionally, when we collectively, as the philanthropy or development went to solve an issue, and we tended to operate in a very siloed approach, right? You say children who drop out of schools, and you think about, the school system, the curriculum, and you really focus on that, no? While when you take a more systemic approach, you think about the whole system where these children are, and the educational system, and all the elements, the families, how they live, and so forth. You start thinking about not only the kind of the academic or the school environment silo, but you think about the fact that, and they discovered in the US and also in other places in Africa, okay, the kids are dropping out because they're hungry, or there's other things that are going on that are not related to the academia, right? So the way to keep them in school is to do school vouchers so they get food in the schools, and therefore they will be there longer and they get exposed to education. So this is it's a very specific example, but it shows like if you go about it in a very siloed, very narrow way, as opposed to looking at the system and then finding what is actually the leverage point or the point on which you can act that actually influences, and that is behind it. It's closer to the root cause why the result is not happening, then you have more impact. No? And I think over the last decade, probably the more the discussion has been evolving towards that. Because even development, philanthropy, and investment has always been very siloed in its approaches, very technical. And so forth. Even if you think of it, the SDGs are very siloed in a way, no? But everything is so interrelated that sometimes you need to, actually look at other elements which are not directly related to unlock the incentive or the trigger the behavior or the mindset change. No, so I don't know whether this answers your question, no? But that's how I see the difference between, they're kind of the project-based or narrow approach vis-a-vis a more systemic mindset.
Yes, yes. That definitely it answers my question. Thank you so much, Alejandro. I was thinking of the capacities that we need as human beings, no, in order to start thinking in a systemic way instead of thinking so linearly, no? What do you think about that?
That's a very good question. I don't have the full answer, but there's a couple of reflections on my mind. I think we need to be, I always say, maybe because I'm a generalist, there's been a super emphasis on specialization, on people who know very deep one issue. And I think system change requires thinking across disciplines more broadly. I'm not saying that there's something wrong with being specialized, and I don't think everybody should be a generalist, nor everybody should be a specialist, but I think there's an increasing need. I think pattern recognition transversely is super important, and that should be part of education. I mean, that's not something about system change. That's even true for business, for a commercial or a corporate, right? So that's one thing. The other thing is, and this sounds like a platitude that's unhelpful, but I think it is true. It's just listening. Because a lot of the times we come with preconceived solutions, and this happens particularly in development a lot, right? It's very top-down, very hierarchical, the development agencies of philanthropy. And in order to really figure out, how the system works and what are the incentives and the triggers and so forth, you actually need to understand, you need to listen much more. You need to, like in business, you need to understand your customers. And that doesn't happen enough. Very often it comes with power. No, I mean, if you have the resources, the financing, so forth, there's this interesting association which happens a lot in this space, which is the one who has the resources is apparently entitled to knowing the answer a bit more. Or if you have more money, you seem to know better, and that very often is just not the case. No. So it's about listening, it's about trust, about thinking transversally, pattern recognition, and so forth. I could not agree more. I think it starts right in school and from little children. And I'm not saying that you don't need to learn the basic hard skills. No, you need to literacy, numeracy, and then But there's been in the last few years, there's been such an emphasis on STEM in education that it looks like if you do that right, then that's it. And we're neglecting some of these other things which kind of get branded as soft skills, but I think they are really, they seem soft, but they are really essential, not only for changing the big systems, but, for any child or human being to operate effectively and relate to others. No? And of course, that has a really hard time in a technocratic world today to get into curricula because space is crowded, and also with our Western Cartesian culture, it doesn't really fit in there that easily. But I think that will be essential in the long run. And of course, it gets complicated because it gets politicized, like always in education, when you start getting into this field.
And what about collaboration, Alejandro? I'm part of many different networks, and I have the feeling that I consider myself a social innovator and social entrepreneur, no? And I'm surrounded by many of us, and we really support each other with knowledge. Sometimes even we develop deeper relationships of like helping each other to manage the challenges that we have, managing scarcity somehow. But I believe scarcity is one of the main obstacles towards collaboration. No, because we are many social innovators, many social entrepreneurs. But at the end, like the news today, USAID has shut down the support, no? So and then suddenly you see yourself in a mindset of, I can't collaborate because I see myself competing, with my peer. This is horrible because this is something that's really hindering, in my opinion, systems change.
I do agree with you. I think it's a real challenge. I think it's the main challenge in the sector. One of it. Well, not enough resources to solve all the problems that there are, but then also this dynamic, which is it's a big reality, And there's no easy solution either, right? Because there are scarce resources. That's a reality. And all these people who work in the space, they need to feed their families as well and so forth. So it's very natural. It's very human. So I think that is a real issue, and there's no real easy answer. Overall, I would say, and just in terms of collaboration, and even collaboration between those who have resources. I'm not talking about the social innovators and the NGOs. There's a lot of talk of collaboration in the sector, but much less work. And a lot of the framing of collaboration, even when there's no real competition, is very selfish in a way. It's very self-centered in the sense that collaboration tends to mean, I have this project, why don't you come and help me in my project? That's what generally collaboration means. As opposed to genuine collaboration, which means, why don't we get together and figure this out? We share. So genuine collaboration really means, again, it sounds like a platitude, but it's when it works well, it is like that. It is really about sharing, and giving. And collaboration requires huge generosity. And unfortunately, very often, the world works in a very transactional manner. I mean, it's almost like it was a trade transaction, I mean, which transactions are not bad themselves, but okay, I have this, I buy it from you, I give you money, you give me the thing, right? And that's how a lot of the economy works and so forth, and that's fine. But that translates as well in how we interact very often, even in the space of development or elsewhere. And that doesn't work that well. I mean, I see that very often where organizations, funders, agencies say, we need to collaborate and we invite you to collaborate. But the solution's already been created. There's the logos and egos that there's always talk about. In those situations, it's super difficult to get others to come on board, unless there's a transactional mindset that, okay, maybe I associate myself to this brand and I get a benefit. But the very stereotypical answer to that, it sounds stereotypical, but it's true, is that in the end, you need to put the problem in the center, and everybody, put their egos behind and co-create, and then is when really things happen, or you get the real solutions. So that's the theory. It doesn't happen enough, I would say.
And working with ecosystem building, how have you seen the whole movement evolve towards system change?
Well, I think the movement towards systems change is pretty nascent still, even though, Daniela Meadows spoke about it a long time, and there's been people who've been talking about it for a long time, but it's not mainstream at all. And I would say it's still not mainstream. There's more velocity and more people talking about it. I think what's happened is that a lot of genuine good people, organizations who are really trying to solve problems over decades are figuring out, we're not making a difference. Well, what's happening? We need to do things very different. So I think there's been a little bit of the sinking in of we're individually or even powerful organizations, we're too small to solve our problems. Even the Gates Foundation is too small to solve world health and everything. So I think that's been sinking in. I see that more and more amongst the philanthropy, socially investment and development ecosystem. And that's why there's more of a genuine discussion happening. And there's been learning, but I think there's still more talk than actual work, because system change is hard, I mean, it's much easier to take a project and do your transaction than think about a system where you need to interact with many different actors. You need to pull levers that are not inside of your comfort zone. You need to share power. It's so much more complex. I'm taking to extremes, I'm not taking extreme, making it all the way. System change requires a change of mindsets and cultures and beliefs. And that's the most effective systems change movements were driven by that, right? Change of mindsets and cultures and beliefs. And if you think about the abolitionist movement or civil rights movement, or the suffragists, before it was okay, slavery was central to many of our economies, or it was, of course, women didn't have the right to vote, or there was racial discrimination, until there was a mindset shift that didn't shift, right? Even with the economic structures. So that makes it very complex, And this is a long answer to your question. How's it evolving? I think, there's increasing realization that there's a need for it, but it's not mainstream yet because it's so difficult to grapple. But I do generally think that at least in this space, everybody's now talking about it in the foundation, philanthropy, development world. Everybody is. Maybe it's everybody who knows each other, and maybe it's an echo chamber, right? But I think it's good because there's some serious players who are already operating differently, right? Based on.
Can you give us some examples? You don't need to name the organizations, but of success cases that you have seen, like where collaboration happened and who are maybe investing in systems change.
There's foundations that are shifting away from, I give you this grant to do this project and build this well in this village in Africa, to now there's much more going in there and then spending a lot of time with the local communities, asking them what do they need and who are the actors who need to be involved. And then they bring a lot of investment in process and engagement, recognizing the agency of the local actors to then design solutions, which are not only you build a well, but you work along a system of things. Not you incubate some businesses with them, you incubate some channels for them to access markets, as opposed to an ad hoc solution. No? This type of more systemic approach, I'm talking at a small scale, right? I'm not talking about climate change, but that already implies a massive change in the way philanthropy development is being deployed. Because in the past it was, I have this grant for you 1 year, you're going to build a well, you're going to build a well, so we're going to solve your problem with water, as opposed to, bringing the community, thinking about mapping the whole system and coming up with different intervention points and doing so over time and letting them decide. And there's more and more of that, fortunately, happening. Not enough, too, because it's never easy it's a much more complicated process, and it's never easy to let go, because in the end, it does require generosity beyond the grants and all that, generosity in terms of giving power, right? And it requires trust and so forth. But no, there's clearly a view, and you'll also find that there are foundations and actors there who are really investing in mapping. You have to see the system first and really understanding all the interrelations, and money's been put into that and time is put into that to identify really the leverage points. So I'm going to dedicate my money in these 3 points, which make the difference later. No? That's becoming a much more regular methodology toolkit for foundations, philanthropists.
And Alex, what is your role in this whole conversation? How do you see yourself?
I have a minor role. I'm a bit of a facilitator, a humble facilitator. I work with an organization that is with RPA, who has a mission to accelerate philanthropy in pursuit of a just world. So we are trying to transform the sector, not in terms of what is funded, but in terms of how, particularly, right? So that it's more effective and more just. And so we use our knowledge, thought leadership, insights, our relationships to try to move the needle in this discussion. No? And so we're facilitators, enablers in this. And that's the role I try to play as well, no? In my humble little world, to try to move the needle. No, we do this both when we advise funders. We also have communities of practice. We have a community of practice on systems change with very important funders, in which there's we facilitate a lot of this knowledge exchange and experience and research to figure this out, right? So that's the way, and we elevate others who know more than we do in certain fields. Talking about systemic investment before other actors are doing that. Well, we try to elevate those and expose those to funders who are thinking about their investments. Say, okay, look at this thinking or body of thoughts or cases and so forth.
A minor role, but a very important one, I believe. Connecting and aligning, bringing people together, making them see that they have a common objective, no? Or that they can share a purpose. And also planting the seed, no? of a shift, of this mindset shift, which is at the core of transformation and at the core of systemic change. So thank you very much for your work, Alex. And now, we are definitely going in the right direction. It is still very marginal. There is still a lot of work to do. So we need to continue pushing and investing our energy and resources to mobilize more people and more organizations into systemic change. And I would like to also pick your brain on how you visualize the next 5 years. What would you like to see?
Wow. I mean, there's so much that needs to improve, right? I mean, globally, especially these days, I mean, there's so many things to fix. But in terms of I would like to see more, go back to some of the themes that we've been discussing to like genuine collaboration with the problems at the center, with generosity and listening, giving agency to the people whose problems we're trying to support, as opposed to giving them the solutions. It's in a whole evolution of the way of doing it. I mean, when I work with philanthropy, I'm very motivated because I think it's small in the greater scheme of capital in the world, but I think it should be playing a